So has it ever happened to you that you meet somebody for the very first time, someone who you don't know from before, have never had anything to do with them, and you're just at a function or at work or at a friend's place, and you're introduced and you hit it off immediately, so quickly, so intensely, to the point where you feel like you've known them forever, and there is something that connects you that you can't exactly describe, but it's a familiarity. It's as if you've been friends for life, and it's just been 5 minutes. Ever had that?
Yeah.
Most of us would have had it at some time. How does that happen? Why does it happen? Is it just that some people we just hit it off with? If that's all it is, then why do we feel like we've known them for a long time? You can feel like you've known them for 5 minutes and it's been really good, but why does it feel like we've known them forever? Could it be that we have known them forever, or at least for a lifetime, or maybe a previous lifetime? Could it be that we're meeting somebody again? It's not for the first time, but we've actually been connected in a past life, and we're just reconnecting, and therefore we hit it off extremely quickly. Could be. It certainly could be. From the perspective of Jewish mysticism, of Kabbalah, we have all been here before. Very few of us are here for the first time. We have done this all before, in a different life, in a different place, in different circumstances, but the soul has come back. And when we come back, others come back. And the people that we interact with, our relationships, our connections, our clashes, all of them have an element of being a continuation of a story that's bigger than just our lifetime. And the possibilities that opens up, the vistas that open up to us when we realize that our lifetime is a small part of a bigger story, it boggles the mind. And so what I'd like to do over these few evenings is to explore the Jewish perspective on reincarnation. The idea that our soul has been here before, might be here again, and why? Why does that happen? What is the meaning behind it? How can we gain from that knowledge? How does it affect us? And what are the mechanisms, what are the workings of reincarnation? And so to do that, we're going to look at some original sources from the Kabbalistic writings, some of which I'm not sure have ever been translated into English. They may have been, but I certainly haven't seen them translated. And we're going to study them in English together and explore the meaning and the function of reincarnation from a Jewish perspective. There are beliefs in other religions and other traditions and other mysticisms about reincarnation, but always the Jewish version will have a unique angle, will be different. And so we're going to be specifically looking at it from a Kabbalistic perspective as it is described by the great Kabbalists, the mystics, in the sources. This idea will not be found in the writings of what's called the revealed Torah. If you open the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, or the Tanakh, the prophets, the writings, even the Talmud, you don't find references to reincarnation, at least not direct references. This idea is written up in the Kabbalistic works, the mystical works. But once you see it in the Kabbalistic works, you see it everywhere. Once you understand what reincarnation is, then you find that the whole Torah speaks about it. It's absolutely everywhere in familiar stories that we know from going to Sunday school or bar mitzvah classes, from childhood, biblical stories. They all have a reincarnation angle once you get the key and are able to open it up. So we're also going to look at some of those. We're going to look at some biblical stories, familiar stories, and see the reincarnation angle that sheds a whole new light, takes it from one dimension to multi-dimension. And we're also going to look at some more contemporary reincarnation stories. Contemporary from a Judaic perspective, being that we've been around for 4,000 years or so. So contemporary means the last 200 years. That's recent for us. So they're the three areas that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the textual ideas, what the Kabbalists say about reincarnation, and try and extrapolate the rules of reincarnation. How does it work? What's the system of reincarnation? Why is somebody reincarnated? In what form are they reincarnated? How many times are they reincarnated? What can they do about their reincarnation? Does it ever end? We'll look into that from the texts, and then we'll see examples of it that the Kabbalists, the mystics, identified in biblical stories and then in daily life stories. So it's hard to know where to start because there's a huge amount of writing on this topic. Starting from the more ancient Kabbalistic works, particularly the Zohar, which is committed to writing in the 2nd century by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in Israel, him and his students. There's entire sections and long discussions of reincarnation. Even more so in the writings of the Arizal Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the great Kabbalist who lived in Tzfat, northern Israel, in the 1500s. He has entire works of his teachings. One is called Shar HaGilgulim, the Gate of Reincarnation. Another one called Sefer HaGilgulim, the Book of Reincarnation. These were committed to writing by his student Rabbi Chaim Vital, the teachings that he taught about reincarnation. And scattered throughout his writings, as we'll see a bit later, ideas of reincarnation. And then one of the students of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, known as Rabbi Menachem Azaria of Pano, the Ramah Mipanoi, a Kabbalist from Italy, 2 generations after the Arizal. He has a book called Gilgulei Neshamas, Reincarnations of Souls, which is sort of like a dictionary of souls. You can look up in alphabetical order the souls that are mentioned in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, and in the Talmud, and he says who they were before and who they were after, and explains why. So any of these works would be very useful to look into. But I did find one good place to start in the writings of a Kabbalist called Rabbi Shaya Horowitz, the Shalah HaKadosh he's known as. He was in the late 1600s in Prague, in Europe, and he, in his magnum opus, he has a huge work of Kabbalah known as the Shalah HaKadosh, Shnei Luchos HaBris, the 2 tablets of the law. In that work, in one of the sections, in one of the parshas of the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, Parshas Kiseitze, he has quite a long, complicated discussion of reincarnation and showing how many of the commandments in the Torah are reincarnation oriented. But in the midst of that, he quotes an earlier Kabbalist from approximately 100 years before him, and he says, this is the most orderly dealing of reincarnation that I've found. Of all the writings that there is about reincarnation, here's a nice systematic presentation of the basic structure of reincarnation. And so he presents that in the name of the Kabbalist Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz. Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz also lived in Tzfat, in Israel. He was born in Salonika in Greece. He was born in the year 1500, died in 1575, and he wrote several Kabbalistic works. The most famous work of his, the most famous thing that he wrote, was not a book, but a poem that became a song that every single Jewish community sings all around the world every week, and that is Lecha Dodi. The song that we sing to welcome Shabbos, Lecha Dodi, was written by a Kabbalist in the 1500s, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. And if you actually look carefully, you'll see that the first 4 stanzas of the song start with the initials of his name. Shamar v'Zachar is Shin, Mikdash Melech, Likras Kala is Lamed, Mikdash Melech, and Hisnari, Lamed, Shin, Lamed Mem Hey, Shlomo, his name, Shlomo Alkabetz. So he puts down a nice summary of the way reincarnation works from a Kabbalistic perspective, and I think that will be a good launching point for our discussion. So I'm going to read to you my own translation of his words, as quoted by the Shalah HaKadosh. So he says the following: when God created man on earth, he formed within him 248 different luminaries which came from the supernal world, And they are the laws of the Torah, the positive commandments that one must do to find a deeper life force in this world and in the next. And 365 sinews, which correspond to the 365 negative commandments. So, again, he says that God created the human being, and he created us in such a way that our body and our soul is made up of 613 parts, both body and soul. There are 365 sinews or arteries, veins, and there are 248 limbs or organs of the body. And these correspond to the 248 positive commandments and the 365 negative commandments. That there are 248 thou shalts, 365 thou shalt nots in the Torah. Even though we often talk about 10 commandments, that's just the highlights, that's the headlines. There are actually 613 commandments throughout the Torah. There are 248 do's, things you should do, and 365 don'ts, things you should not do. The human body was created with 248 limbs, 365 sinews, which correspond to those commandments, and our soul also is made up of those 613 lights or emanations, positive and negative. And so when we fulfill a commandment, when we do a mitzvah, we are lighting up one of those lights of our soul. We're connecting our body to that, our limb to that. And when we transgress a commandment, when we do something we're not supposed to do, so we corrupt or negate or bring darkness to a part of our soul and to a part of our body as well. There is parenthetically another Kabbalistic work by Rabbi Zikri, one of the other Kabbalists from Tzfat, that goes through which limb corresponds to which commandment. And I guess in theory, if you had a back problems, maybe you need to find out which commandment corresponds to the back and work on that commandment. Or maybe you need a new mattress. So the that's right. So Reb Shlomo Elkabetz is telling us that our body has limbs and organs and sinews and veins. Our soul also has a structure, a spiritual structure, and we have mitzvahs, the commandments, that is to elevate the body, connect the soul to a higher place. And this is what we were created to do. A healthy being, a healthy person is somebody who's healthy in body and soul, which means not just physical health, not just eating the right foods and exercising, but also spiritual health, connecting your limbs through the commandments, fulfilling the commandments to the best of your ability. Now, he continues, God breathed into his nostrils a living soul, which is a piece of himself. So the soul is a breath of divine energy that was breathed into the first human being, Adam, and into all of us. And that soul becomes elevated and perfumed by the commandments. Meaning your soul is holy, it's divine, but for it to be able to enter into the higher realms after a life in this world, it's through performing the commandments down here in this world. When we have free choice down here in this world, in a body, we could go either way. We don't have to do the right thing, we could do the wrong thing. We don't have to do what's moral, we could be immoral. While we're down here in this world, we have the opportunity to do good, to increase goodness and holiness in the world through the commandments. When we do that, we perfume our soul, we enclothe it, we dress it up to be ready to go to a higher place. That our soul came from the heavens, it comes down, but it goes back up after our lifetime. But not back up to where we started. It has to go higher than where we started, otherwise the whole thing isn't worth it. For the soul to come into the world just to go back to where it came from, there's no gain. The soul comes down into this world, faces the trials of life in this world, the tests, the temptations, the various challenges that we have, in order to gain a perfume, a scent, a level of holiness that you can't get in heaven. Because in heaven you don't have free choice, you don't have the opportunity to do good, to change anything. Down here in the world you do. So by accumulating those commandments, we connect each part of our soul, we perfume it, we prepare it to go up to a higher place. But that only works as long as none of them are missing. As long as none of the pieces of the soul are lacking. You have to fulfill all 613 levels of your soul in your lifetime in order for your soul to be able to go back up and find its place up there in a higher place than where you started. And if any one of those pieces is missing, if it doesn't have all the spices, then the soul will die. Meaning, it cannot rise up to the place in heaven where it belongs. It doesn't have the energy, it doesn't have the strength to go back to where it needs to go. It's weakened. It doesn't have all of the ingredients to fly up to its heavenly realm where it belongs. And the more commandments that it's missing, the more mitzvahs that it didn't do, the further away the soul is from where it needs to go. And that's just talking about if you failed to do the right thing. But how much more, he continues, if you actually transgressed and did evil, did something wrong, committed a sin. How much more if you didn't do what you're supposed to do, but you actually did the wrong thing, then you've distanced yourself, your soul is incomplete, it's not able to go where it needs to go. So far, Rabbi Shlomo Al-Kabetz here has given us a serious description of our life mission. We're down here in this world to fulfill every single level of our soul, to elevate it so we can go to a higher place. Those levels of the soul, 613, corresponding to the 613 commandments, positive and negative. And only, it doesn't say here, if you did your best, you did quite a bit, so then everything's fine. It says you got to do them all. And if you didn't do them all, trouble. Your soul can't get to where it needs to go. That is if you didn't do what you were supposed to do, and even more so if you did what you weren't supposed to do. If you lacked, if there was good that you could have done, you had an opportunity to do a mitzvah and you didn't do it, well, that's a lack in the soul. If you transgressed a sin, you did something forbidden, you increased negativity in the world, so that's even worse. You're very far from where you need to go. Your soul can't get back to where it needs to go. Now, thank God, he continues and gives us a bit of insight into how we can possibly make it through this. So he says, Rabbi Al-Kabetz, but God in his infinite kindness with his creations strategized to ensure that no soul misses out. That God made sure that no soul should not be able to get where it needs to go. So having given us this awesome task of doing all the right things and never doing anything wrong, but God knows we're human, and so he's given us strategy. And that is, what is the strategy? God established a system of reincarnation through which the soul comes back into this world. So we've got a massive mission to fulfill, but we're given another chance to fulfill it. Not necessarily does it need to be done all at once. Not every part of our soul is going to be fulfilled in one lifetime. There's a system of reincarnation to allow us to fix what we didn't get done the first time. So what that means is that it's not expected that in one lifetime you get it all right. In fact, maybe in that lifetime, in this particular lifetime, you don't need to get it all right. Maybe you just need to get something right. Maybe you got other stuff right last time. There's just something you didn't get right, so you got this time to get that one right. And if you don't manage to get everything right this time, so there'll be another time. So we see from here first and foremost that reincarnation is coming from the divine kindness. He's given us a massive mission to fulfill, and he's given us opportunities to fulfill it. If we didn't get it right, you'll get another turn, another chance. Reincarnation, therefore, is not a punishment. It's not a curse. It's not being forced back and being banished from heaven. On the contrary, it's to help us get to where we need to go in the spiritual worlds, in the upper worlds, in the heavenly realms, so you can be sent back down to fix what you didn't get right first time. And he continues that there are really three types of reincarnation, he says. Three categories of reincarnation, which correspond to the three patriarchs of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, to introduce what he's about to say, the three fathers of the Jewish people, three generations, Abraham, his son Isaac, and grandson Jacob, in Kabbalistic works are identified with three different emotional faculties or character traits. Abraham is known as the man of chesed, of loving kindness. Yitzchak, Isaac, the man of gevura, which is strictness, justice, discipline. And Yaakov is attributed to tiferet, which is synonymous with rachamim, mercy, empathy, compassion. We see this in their lifetime, that we see that Abraham was a man of love, of great generosity, extreme hospitality. Isaac was a much more inward, strict, harsh person. And Yaakov, Jacob had both. He had a mix of both and was able to empathize with all. So Rabbi Al-Kabbat says that there's three types of reincarnation, corresponding to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob: chesed, gvur, and tiferes, loving kindness, strictness, and compassion. What are they? So he says, some souls return to this world not because of a deed they failed to perform, nor to receive a punishment for a sin that they transgressed, rather simply to give a gift to the people of this earth. There are some souls that come down not because they lacked something in their previous life, not because they didn't do this good thing or they did this wrong thing, not because there's an emptiness they have to fulfill or a mistake that they have to correct. There are some souls that come down to give a gift to the world. They're not coming down for themselves, for their own needs. They're coming down for the needs of the world. So it's a very powerful, beautiful, high soul who has an amazing light, and really they could stay in heaven. They've done their bit. They don't need to come down. But God, in his kindness, sends this soul down because they have something special to contribute to the world, a gift to give to the people around them. This is the first type of reincarnation. And he says this is hinted at in a verse describing Moses. He implies that Moses was such a soul who came down to give a gift to the world. Not because he had to correct something, but he came down to give a gift to the world. There's a verse where Moses is talking to the Jewish people, and he says, God became angry at me because of you. He's talking to the Jewish people, and he says that you guys did wrong, and God got angry at me because of you. But the word angry is a strange word. The usual word for angry is not used. The Hebrew word is v'yitaber Hashem bi levanchem. It says v'yitaber, ayin bedresh is the shoresh, is a strange word for anger. It's translated as anger, but it's a strange word. Usually v'yitaber means from the word ibur, which means pregnancy. That God impregnated me for your sake, because of you. Now, what does that mean? So Rav Shlomo Kabbalah explains that impregnation is a Kabbalistic word which means reincarnation. That there's one form of reincarnation that is compared to a pregnancy. Just like a pregnancy is a life within a life, a soul within a soul, so too there's a form of reincarnation where a soul is sent down and takes a ride on another soul. Like one soul is pregnant with another. And so this type of reincarnation usually means it's for a particular short amount of time, like a pregnancy. A person becomes pregnant and eventually the life comes out of them. So too, this form of reincarnation is where for a particular time, a soul comes down, fulfills a particular mission, and then that soul leaves, and the other soul is still there. So for a period of time in somebody's life, they could be impregnated with another soul, a higher soul, to fulfill a particular mission, and then that soul can move on, and you go on with your life. Which this type of reincarnation we'll have to speak about more in detail, but Rabbi Shlomo Kabetz is quoting it as meaning that Moses' soul, he says about himself that God impregnated me for your sake. I came down, Moses says, to fulfill a mission for you, to give the Jewish people the Torah, to bring down the divine light, to take them out of Egypt, to lead them through the desert. It was all for them, it wasn't for him. He didn't have to correct anything, it was something that he was doing for others. Now we'll see a bit later that is talking about a certain period of Moses' life. But it seems that Moshe, according to the Kabbalists, did have certain corrections that he needed to make because of previous lifetimes, but that we'll see a bit later. So this is the first type of reincarnation, a reincarnation that comes to give a gift to the world. And this, he says, this reincarnation form corresponds to kindness, chesed, the attribute of Avram, the first of the patriarchs. That's number one. The second form of reincarnation, some souls come back into the world to be cleansed of sins, which can only be corrected in this world. Because this is the system that the King of Kings has established. That you can only fix things in this lifetime, in this world. You can't fix things in heaven. A soul in a body can change, can apologize, can improve, can make amends. A soul outside of a body can't do any of that. This lifetime is a dynamic lifetime where things can change and be improved. The soul outside of a body is stagnant, relatively speaking, cannot change things anymore. And so if a soul left this world, but there was some wrongdoing that they left behind, that there was something that they broke, some negativity that they left in this world, so then God sends them back down, they're reincarnated to fix what they broke. Because you have to do it down here in this world. You can't do it up there anymore. It has to be down here. So sometimes somebody's reincarnated to fix what they broke down here in this world. He says this would also apply to somebody who transgressed many times, deserving many death penalties. For each death penalty, they come back down again to experience death again. So here we're talking about somebody who's really done some bad stuff. You know, in the legal system, you hear people who get 60 life sentences. So what does that mean? That means that 59 of them don't count. They're just going to get one life sentence. Doesn't matter how heinous the crime, doesn't matter how terrible what they've done. You can pile up these life sentences. It doesn't matter. There's only one life. That's in the human justice system. In the divine justice system, if somebody got 60 life sentences, they'll come back and experience 60 times the punishment that they need to be punished. If that's how bad they are, if that's how much damage they've caused, so then that soul has a lot of cleansing that it needs to be done. And that cleansing, some of it can only be done down here. You can't fix things up there in heaven. You can only fix it down here. So, for example, the Arizal says that there's a saying in the Talmud, Tzedakah tatzil mimoves, that charity saves from death. Giving charity saves someone from death. So the Arizal explains, what does that mean? That if, God forbid, a person has transgressed, has done something so bad that they deserve death, so how do you fix that? One way to fix it is to give life. If you enliven somebody, if you enliven the poor, give them life by bringing charity to the poor, save people's lives, So that's bringing life, that saves from death. That's countering the negativity, the death that you brought into the world. So that can only be done down here. Charity can only be done in this world. There's no opportunity to do that up there. So he says that if somebody's deserving many punishments, many death penalties, they have to come down every time and experience that. Death. Come down and die again. Now, he says, but it should be emphasized that this form of incarnation that is a punishment only happens when somebody didn't repent in their lifetime. If they don't fix it, the idea is not to just be sent down again and again and be punished. If it's not working, there's not much point. 60 life sentences, if you haven't learned your lesson, so after the first, second, third, how many life sentences are we going to give you until you're rehabilitated? Eventually, you've got to fix it. And as soon as you fix it, as soon as you change your ways, so then you don't need this anymore. So you may see somebody, he says, who in their current lifetime doesn't seem to have done anything terribly evil, but it could be in a previous life they have, and they're down here to fix it this time. And if they fix it in this lifetime, then the cycle of reincarnation will be ended. But if somebody does not repent after 3 chances, if somebody's sent down into this world a second time, a third time, and they still are making things worse rather than better, they're not fixing it, so then he will no longer be reincarnated as a human, but he'll be reincarnated as a non-human, an animal, maybe a kosher animal, maybe not a kosher animal. He says, first easier incarnations and then more difficult incarnations. And this could also apply to non-animal, to plant life. You could be reincarnated as a plant. You could even be reincarnated as a mineral, a rock. And so therefore, he says, the Arizal teaches that you can be 3 times reincarnated in human form, and then, if you didn't get it right, you go down into animals. And this corresponds to the attribute of pachad, of fear, which is the attribute of Yitzchak, of strictness, of justice. You've got to fix what you broke. Then, the third and final type of reincarnation, he says, some souls return to this world to do a mitzvah, to do a good deed that they missed out on the first time. Not to fix something they broke, but there was something good that they should have done and didn't do. There was something they could have improved in the world. There was a goodness, a light, a holiness that they could have contributed that they didn't contribute. They need to fulfill their mission. And such a person, if it's a good deed that you haven't done, will come down up to 1,000 times until they fulfill their mission. This, he says, is the meaning of the verse in the 10 Commandments. It says that God shows kindness up to 1,000 generations. What's that's hinting at is not 1,000 generations, ensuing generations, but a person can come down 1,000 times to do a good deed. When it comes to fixing something you broke, a negative thing that you've done, a transgression, that you got 3 chances to do. If you don't do it then, so then who knows, you're just going to get worse. So then you go into the animal system. But if the reincarnation is just to do a good deed, was something good that you needed to do. So that you can come up to 1,000 times, God will give you another chance and another chance just to do that one good thing. And this corresponds to the attribute of mercy, of Rachamim, which is the attribute of Yaakov, the third of the forefathers, Jacob. Because God in His mercy gives us another chance and another chance. Just do that one good thing. Here ends the introduction to reincarnation for Rabbi Shlomo Kabetz. But one other thing that he mentions, which we'll speak about at a later time, is that this idea could explain why we see certain tragedies in this world where lives seem to be cut tragically short. Even babies who don't survive for no apparent reason. It could be a part of this soul journey that is something deeper that we don't really know where they're coming from and why they had to do that. So we see here a nice overview, a bit of a summary of the ideas behind reincarnation. That either we're here to fix something we broke, we're here to do a good deed that we should have done last time, or maybe we're just here to give a gift to the world. We're not here for ourselves, we're here to give to others. Not to fix ourselves, but to contribute something that only we can do. The only way to really understand what he's talking about is to look at some examples. Is to look at reincarnations that were identified by the Kabbalists, by the mystics, and to see how it works. Because we don't really know what happened with us last time. But the Kabbalists had a power to look at a person and see their previous incarnations, and to look at characters from our tradition, from the Tanakh, and identify why this is happening in their life. And so, let's look at an example. We mentioned Moshe, earlier. A fascinating story is how Moses met his soulmate, his wife, Zipporah. An unbelievable story. Moses was a Jewish boy who was adopted by the Egyptian princess, grew up in Egypt, a Jew, knowing he was a Jew, and it says that at a certain point in his life, he went out and he saw that the Jewish people who were enslaved in Egypt were being mistreated. He saw an Egyptian beating a Jewish slave almost to death. The background to the story was that the Egyptian had his eye on this Jewish man's wife. Shlomit Bat Divri was her name. And so the Egyptian wanted to kill him and take his wife. So he was beating him. Moses saw this and he intervened. He killed the Egyptian. Which is interesting. Moses, who is the lawgiver, the source of morality, killed somebody. Because if you see somebody about to kill an innocent person, the moral thing to do is to intervene. And that's what he did. He killed the Egyptian. How did he kill him? So our sages say he actually used a mystical incantation. He pronounced a divine name of God. He didn't actually hit. He said a name of God, a holy name of God, that killed him. Word got out that Moses had killed an Egyptian, and Pharaoh was chasing Moses, wanting to bring him to justice. So Moses ran away. He left and he ran to the neighboring country of Midian. And while he's there, he goes to a well, and there's a young girl there, and she invites him home. And she happens to be the daughter of a priest of Midian, called at the time Yeter, later known as Jethro, and this girl, her name is Zipporah. Jethro likes Moses and gives his daughter as a wife to Moses, and Moses gets married to Jethro's daughter, Zipporah. What had happened at that time? Jethro himself had been a leader in Midian, a Cohen, a priest of Midian, he was described as. But he, right at that time, had started a spiritual search of his own. He decided that the idolatry that he was worshipping and he was a priest of wasn't true, and he started questioning it, so he lost his job. As would be expected, if you're a priest of a religion that you then start questioning, so they don't want you there anymore. So he was thrown out. And this was the time when he met Moses, and he was introduced to monotheism, which in fact he embraced. Moses, after marrying Zipporah and having 2 sons with her, together in Midian, then was out looking after the sheep of Jethro. He became the shepherd of Jethro's sheep, and he would take them out into the desert to feed. And while he was there, he saw a burning bush, and the bush was not consumed. He went to have a look at it, and he heard the voice of God telling him that, Moses, you have the mission to go back and to tell Pharaoh, let my people go, to bring the people out of Egypt. And so he returns to Egypt. His brother Aaron meets his wife and kids and says, who are these? My family. He says, why are you bringing them here? We're slaves here. They're free. Let them stay free. So he sends them back to Midian, and Moses goes alone back into Egypt and faces Pharaoh. The whole story of the 10 plagues. Eventually the Israelites leave Egypt, and after leaving Egypt, Jethro, his father-in-law, with Zipporah, his wife, and Gershom and Eliezer, his 2 sons, they rejoin Moses, and Jethro comes and says, I am your father, Jethro, and your wife, we've come to be with you. This whole story, and every single detail in the story, has been identified as a correction of a whole bunch of reincarnations. The Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, in several of his works, one called Likutei Torah, one called Shar Psukim, Sefer Likutim, in various different places, identifies every detail in this story as being a reincarnation story that goes back very, very far. It goes back all the way to the first family, to the children of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. The story of Cain and Abel is that Cain and Abel, the first 2 sons of Adam, of the world of Adam and Eve, did not get on. There are several reasons why they didn't get on, but the main one our sages say is because there's a part of the story that you don't see in the text of the Bible, of the Torah, but is clear from the oral tradition. Who did Cain and Abel marry? If these were the first people in the world, Adam and Eve, and then they had sons Cain and Abel, who did Cain and Abel marry? Must be someone or we wouldn't be here. So who did they marry? So sages say that there's a hint in the Torah text that they each had twin sisters. Cain had 1 twin sister, Abel had 2 twin sisters. And it's hinted at in the words, but it's not clearly in the words. You don't see it until it's extracted. And back then that was fine. To marry your twin sister was the furthest away in the gene pool that you could go. So it was totally normal. Cain was jealous of Abel because he had 2 twin sisters. Abel had 2 and Cain only had 1. Not only that, but one of the sisters, the extra twin, was particularly beautiful, and Cain wanted her. So that was the beginning of the problems. So Cain was then just looking for an excuse to get rid of his brother Abel. And so it ended up that Cain was a farmer. He farmed the land. Abel was a shepherd. He looked after sheep. And so Cain said, well, I'm the firstborn, I'm older, so I should get a double portion, more than you. The land all belongs to me, I'm a farmer. You look after the sheep, but I have all the land. All the land belongs to me. Abel says, well, how am I supposed to feed my sheep if I don't have land? So that's your problem. You figure that out, but the land is mine. So Abel had no choice but to steal grazing land from Cain, who had claimed all of the land, which Cain got angry at him about. Then they gave offerings to God. This is in the Torah that each one gave an offering to God. Cain gave some flax because he worked in the field. Abel gave some sheep because that's what he worked with. And it says that God accepted the offering of Abel and not the one of Cain. That was the last straw. So Cain got up and killed Abel, killed his brother. Great start to the first family in history. That's what happened. In comes the Arizal. Rabbi Yitzchak Lurian tells us these souls needed big fixings. Big correction had to go on here. And so Abel's soul was reincarnated in the form of Moshe. Moses had Abel's soul. And the soul of Cain was reincarnated in the Egyptian. The Egyptian taskmaster. What was he doing? He was beating a man because he wanted to take his wife. Same old, same old. And this time, Abel had to do justice and say that if you want to murder an innocent person, then you've foregone your innocence. And so Moses, the soul of Abel, killed the Egyptian soldier who was the soul of Cain. But the Arizal says that was a part of the soul of Cain. He didn't kill him physically, he killed him by saying a divine name. Because what Abel, in the form of Moses, wanted to do was not just end Cain, but fix him up, elevate him. So he did it with a divine name. He tried to bring holiness to him that would kill off the negativity in Cain's soul and try and find the spark of goodness. Because even somebody who's done something as horrible as Cain did to Abel, but there's some goodness in his soul that he's corrupted, that has to be fixed, that has to be returned, that has to be elevated. We have to find his goodness. So by saying this divine name, says the Arizal, Moshe, Abel's soul, was able to get rid of the negative, the corruption of Cain's soul, and find that spark of goodness that now had to be returned and fixed. So the Egyptian who is just repeating Cain's evil is the negativity of Cain's soul. Then suddenly Moses had to run away because of what he'd done. But we know that the divine plan is that sometimes circumstances push you to go to a certain place. You think it's because of this reason, but maybe it's because of that reason. He thought he was running away from people who were trying to get him, the Egyptian authorities. But actually he was running to meet his soulmate. He went to Midian to find Zipporah, his soulmate. Because when the negative side of Cain's soul had been obliterated and killed off in the Egyptian, the positive spark of Cain flew and appeared in the neighboring country of Midian in the soul of Yitro. Yitro's name was Yeter, and he was known as Yeter HaKaini, Yeter the Cainite. What's the Cainite? from Cain. He had the soul of Cain. And his name was Yeter, which means extra, because Cain, his hatred to his brother was because of the extra twin that he yearned for, and he took away. So Yeter Hakeni had the positive spark of Cain's soul that suddenly came into him at this point after the Egyptian had been killed. And so suddenly Yitro, the Kohen Midian, he was the priest of Midian, the high priest of the idolatry of Midian, didn't want idolatry anymore. He was looking for monotheism. He was looking for a better way, because the holy spark, the positive spark of Cain's soul entered him, and so therefore he left the idolatry. In fact, Kohen Midian, the Arizal says, the high priest of Midian. Midian, the word Midian is the country, but Midian, the meaning of the word is fighting. Midian means to fight. The Kohen Midian, the priest of fighting, who in history is the priest, the high priest of fighting, the father of discord, is Cain, which is this now in Yitro's soul. So Yitro now had to do what Cain was supposed to do. He has to fix Cain's mistake. So Cain wanted to take away Abel's wife. Yitro gave Abel, in the form of Moshe, a wife. He gave Tzipporah, who had the soul of the extra twin of Abel, he gave her to him. They married each other. Not only that, but it says in the Torah that Moshe Hayaroy, that Moshe used to be a shepherd. What do you mean used to be a shepherd? Well, from Hevel, from the times of Abel already he was a shepherd. Just like Abel looked after sheep, so to Moshe looked after sheep. And so Yitro, Cain, gave Moshe, Abel, his sheep to look after. But this time, instead of taking sheep on land that doesn't belong to him, he took the sheep into the desert, which was no man's land. Everybody can feed there. Because Abel, the one thing that we could say he did slightly wrong was he took the crops, the grazing from Cain's land. So now Abel, to fix that, in the form of Moshe, took these sheep out into the desert where he was allowed to let them feed. The Arizal says that one other little blemish on Abel's soul was that when they gave the offerings, the sacrifices, it says that the divine presence came down and consumed his offering, Abel's offering. Cain's was not accepted, but Abel's was. How was it accepted? That the divine presence came, a godly light came to consume the offering. And Abel, at that moment, stared at the divine presence. He looked at it. You're not supposed to do that. When there's a revelation of God, you're not supposed to stare at it. But he did. He didn't know he did. So Abel had to fix that. So Moshe, when he's looking after the sheep of Yitro, and he sees the burning bush, it says that he looked away. He was scared to look. Because this time Abel was fixing what he did last time. Rather than stare at the burning bush, at the divine revelation, he looked away, knowing that it's too high to stare at. And so, in this form, everything has been fixed. The soul of Cain has now returned the extra twin, is not jealous of Abel anymore, looks after him, gives him life, where before he killed him. And it says that when Cain, in his first incarnation, killed Abel, to do that, he said a statement. Before he killed Abel, he said, "Les din veles dayan." There's no judgment and there's no judge. He denied the divine justice in the world. There's no judgment and there's no judge. I can do what I want. He had to justify it. Nobody does evil without first justifying it with a philosophy that backs it. You don't just murder somebody. You convince yourself that it's okay. So he said, there's no judgment, there's no judge, so I can let my anger run free. And so Yitro, the reincarnation, did something very different. When Yitro joined the Jewish people, he advised Moses on setting up a system of justice. He told him how to appoint judges to bring a system of justice into the world. So everything that Cain did wrong, Yitro did right. So what do we see from this story? We see that reincarnation is that you'll be put into a circumstance which is exactly the same as you were put in a previous lifetime, just maybe a different place, with different characters, different setup, different time, but it's actually the exact same choice. That what you did wrong last time, you're going to have an opportunity to get it right this time. The negativity that you may have caused in a previous life, in the next life, you'll have the opportunity to fix, to reverse it, to do it right. And the circumstances are orchestrated in such a way that you end up in a place where you didn't expect, just to fix the thing that your soul is here to do. If you would have asked Moses 5 minutes before he killed the Egyptian, what are your plans? What are you up to? Where are you going this afternoon? You busy next week? Can you get together? He said, yeah, sure, fine. He didn't know that he was about to be faced with an awesome challenge. There's a man about to kill an innocent person, and I have to stand up for it. And by doing that, I'm correcting a soul, and then that caused him to have to leave town and run away. If you would have asked him then, as he's running away, what's going on? He would have said, I'm being chased by the law. So where are you running? I'm just running to get out of there. He had no idea that he was running to meet his soulmate. So he had to go there. And that soulmate was the wife from his previous life who was taken away from him, or he was taken away from her. And now they're being reunited. If you would have asked Jethro, Yitro, Moses' future father-in-law, 5 minutes before this story happened, so what do you do for a living? He would have said, I'm the high priest of Midian. Okay, you can't make a comfortable living out of that? So yeah, it's pretty good. People give offerings and donations, and it's a very honored place. He was doing fine. And then suddenly, this soul jumps into him, and he looks around and he says, this is meaningless what I'm doing. This life has no meaning whatsoever. I'm actually fooling everybody. I'm worshipping these idols that are not real and making money out of it. It's all false, it's empty. And he starts looking for truth and seeking a higher way. He has no idea that the reason that happened is because there was an Egyptian that was just killed, and there was a soul that just jumped into you, and now there's a yearning to fulfill your mission, to connect it to where you need to be. And Tzipporah, when she bumps into this guy at the well and brings him home, has no idea that this is her soulmate who was just sent to her because last time he was taken away from her. So what this brings out is that every one of our lives is so full of weird occurrences, unexpected twists and turns, things that push us in this direction or that direction. And we're suddenly forced to make decisions, sometimes very on-the-spot decisions, to know what to do. And what reincarnation teaches us is that you're much more complex than you even thought. You thought you were complex. You thought you were complicated. You thought you had a lot going on. There's way more. You just not just the complexes of this lifetime. You got all the stuff from a previous life to fix. And so when something seems to go wrong, or things fall apart, or you're forced to question who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, that can be scary, quite intimidating. But it's probably really good, because it is probably God putting into your path a detour that's not really a detour. It's leading you to where you need to go to fulfill your mission. And so we need to be so ready for those moments, because in any one of those steps, had somebody just taken their eyes off the ball for a minute, it wouldn't have worked out. If Moses saw the Egyptian hitting the Israelite and said, it's not my business. Or if the authorities hadn't heard about this happening, so Moses wouldn't have run away, or if he would have run the different direction, or if Zipporah would not have invited him home and cared for a stranger, or if Yitro, having these pangs of consciousness, being a priest of idolatry, would have said, it pays the bills, I'm just going to stick with it. Had anyone not done what they had to do in any of those moments, so then all these souls would be still in limbo. So we have to recognize that we are exactly where we need to be, and nothing has gone wrong. We've been pushed into this place to make the right decision, and we need to pray for divine wisdom to do the right thing, because our soul might depend on it. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking. I'll take any questions on what I said.
What about,
Yep.
there are some souls like the Alter Rebbe who was a new soul, was sent out and was never actually reincarnated before.
Correct.
I mean, getting up for reincarnation.
Yeah. Well, there are exceptions. There are souls that are not reincarnated. The Arizal Rabbi Yitzchak Luria said 500 years ago that there are very few new souls coming down these days. The Alter Rebbe, yes, the author of the Tanya, he was identified by the Baal Shem Tov as being a new soul, and that must mean that the ideas that he brought into the world were so revolutionary. They were completely new. An old soul couldn't do that. It had to be a new soul coming down. So the book of Tanya, that book, and his other works are so innovative, such a new angle that's a completely new soul. But that's the exception, not the rule. We can safely assume that doesn't apply to any of us, that we're old souls. Which means that there's just a little bit we've got to fix. We've been here before, we've done a lot before. Of the 613 missions, maybe 612 are done with. There's just the one mitzvah that we need to do to fix this soul, and we'll be done.
So as soon as it's done, the person dies, the soul can go back?
Okay, that's a good question. Do we die as soon as we've done our mission? Not necessarily, because if a soul has come down for one very specific thing, then sometimes yes, sometimes it's done, and then the soul moves on. And that is also a kindness for that soul, because the longer we're in this world, the more challenging it is, and the easier it is to fall back, to slip backwards. And so fulfilling the mission and moving on is in a way a kindness for that soul. But that doesn't mean that every time we do a good deed, we should be scared that might be it, and and be reluctant to, I'm not sure if I want to help this person, because that might be it. That we do have more than one mission. All of us have more than one mission, but there might be just one big thing. Yeah.
With the test that is repeated, that we're put in the same situation. If we don't rise to the occasion, will in our lifetime as we know it, will we be offered the same thing again? Does that make sense?
Okay, that's a good question. Are we given the a chance to fix it just once in our lifetime, or could it happen again? So I believe that it could be given to us again, but it could be it depends how massive and big that thing is, and how ready we are to recognize that. It could be that there's one moment that moment can never come back again. If you don't do a good deed, so then that's another thing we have to fix now. So it could be in your lifetime you'll have another chance to do that, but you'll have to double now. You have to fix not only the previous lifetime, but also this thing that you missed out on this time as well. So it does accumulate. So therefore it gets harder. But yeah, we could have another chance. Yeah.
If these things that we have to do, which I believe we do, are so massive and so important, don't you think a roadmap might be more than floundering around in the dark? Did I do it? Is this my mission? Is this not? What should I do? I mean, if there's 613 choices, first of all, that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know what you need to be working on? There is nothing, it's not like God's tapping you on the shoulder saying, okay, this is the mitzvah, you've got to do this life.
Right.
And if it's so big, shouldn't it be easier to figure out what we should do? I don't mean easy, because none of it's easy, but easier.
It's a fantastic question. Shouldn't we just be told exactly this is what you got to do and that's it?
Or even in the ballpark.
Yeah. So
I'm not saying exactly, but somewhere.
we're going to see the answer to that in more detail next week when we talk about animal reincarnations. But briefly, we're given the 613 commandments, which that is the guideline. This is what you got to do. So then I have to apply that to my circumstance. What mitzvah opportunity do I have? What good deed do I have today? And I have to make sure I'm maximizing that to do as much good as I can, avoid the evil as much as I can. And then I know that I'm doing my mission. But the problem is, if I knew the one mitzvah that I had to do, there's a lot of other good that I should be doing as well. Just because that's not the correction of my soul doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. But we'd become so focused on just that deed that we'd actually become less moral people. There's the fixing of my soul, but then there's the doing good in the world. And so we can't be totally preoccupied with fulfilling my particular soul's mission. We should be saying every day has a mission. The day has a mission. Not me, not my soul. The day has a mission. I've got to be doing good today. But we'll see why it's not possible to know exactly. We'll talk about it more at length next week. Yeah.
So I'm not sure that this is a question really about reincarnation as such. I mean, I agree and believe with so much of what you said, but what I struggle with is, where does this thing come from? Like when you lose someone really close to you, how rabbis or anybody else they use that term of, well, they're up there, they're with you, okay, they're with you. So like, or like you're not, they're looking down, they're watching you, they're here with you, all of that kind of stuff. So how does that concept, how can you interpret that concept with losing someone and still being told they're with you with reincarnation? Like how does that actually work?
That's a fantastic question. That it seems a bit contradictory in a way, that we usually understand that a soul passes away, goes to a higher place of rest, and we pray for them, we visit their grave, and we believe that as a soul they're not in a body anymore, so therefore they're able to be with us anywhere, and they're not limited to a body. Whereas here we're saying that souls come back down. So who are you praying for? What grave are you visiting? Like they might be down the road, or they're back around here. So the soul is structured in a much more complicated way than just a soul down here goes up, comes back down. a soul is multifaceted, many layers and many sparks. The Kabbalists use the word sparks of the soul. What's reincarnated is not the entire soul, because every person in a lifetime has fulfilled some of their mission, has done some good. Of those 613 levels, let's say, so some of them have been fulfilled. The unfulfilled portion of the soul is what comes back down. The fulfilled portion of the soul goes up and doesn't come back down. So in any one lifetime, there is an element of the soul that goes up to rest and doesn't come back. And there's an element of the soul that was unused, unfulfilled, that comes back down to be fixed. Does that mean that that's only a half, a quarter, or 613th of a soul is coming down? What does it mean? No. Every soul is configured to be a complete soul, because it's not a physical thing. Physical, if you divide it, so then you've only got half and then half. Souls are spiritual entities, so a bit of it is a soul as well. And so the fulfilled parts of the souls move on, and the unfulfilled part comes back. So we still talk about a person going up to rest, and yet there could be part of their soul that has come back down, and not necessarily in one person. It could even come back in several sparks in different places. Yeah.
When you said that this part of the soul re-entered the body of already existing person, so how is that, like that two different souls there? Or
So
replaced,
there's
or
two
where?
types of reincarnation. There's reincarnation at birth, where a soul is born with a combination of whatever soul came before. Then there's the ibur, the pregnancy form of incarnation, which is where at a certain point in life a soul latches onto another soul for a temporary period of time and then leaves. So it's two different types of reincarnation. So you could go through a patch in your life where you feel different. You have maybe added strength and insight, or you're heavier than usual. Things seem like you've got a lot on your shoulders. Well, you're pregnant on a soul level, and you're carrying another soul with another mission that you have to fix, and that might come with certain challenges. That might be a time in your life where you go through a lot of stuff, difficult stuff. But that's because there's a soul that can't fix themselves, that they've latched onto you because you can fix them. Then you'd go through your thing, and then they're set free, and then suddenly, like, your life changes. And it could be the opposite. It could be that you have an extra boost. You go through a time when you've got more strength, more insight than usual, and that's because there's a higher soul that has joined onto you to help you. Souls do come down to give gifts as well, we said.
But as far as the gifts, isn't that like a punishment? So you've done really well, therefore you're going back again.
I think maybe those souls are very selfless souls that don't mind coming back to help out.
And those souls that are coming back get in trouble again if they've only come back from the goodness of their soul?
There is always a risk in reincarnation that maybe you won't fix what last time, you actually make more problems.
Right.
There's always a risk. There is always a risk. But there are ways of avoiding that, but we'll talk about that in 2 weeks' time, God willing. Yeah.
That's good what you're saying about the gift thing and talking about twins. A friend of mine had a child, I think she had twins, but they came early, and one passed away the week after, another passed away a few months later. But she was learning about Kabbalah, and she said that it was interesting because she had maiden aunts who died many years ago, and these babies were buried almost in a line with those maiden aunts, and she thought maybe they came back and it was some sort of gift.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's yeah.
Amazing. Okay. We'll end there. God willing, next week we'll come back and we'll discuss more in detail what it means to be reincarnated in non-human form. What's the difference between being reincarnated human or an animal? Why would we be reincarnated as an animal? What do we do if that happens? That we'll discuss next week, God willing.